Good afternoon. Welcome to Building a JavaScript Library. We're very happy to have John Resig here with us today. John is a JavaScript Evangelist, and he works for Mozilla Corporation. And he is the author of the book Pro JavaScript Techniques. He's also the creator and lead developer of the jQuery JavaScript Library, and he is the co-designer of the FUEL JavaScript Library, which will be included in Firefox 3, is included in Firefox 3. And he's currently located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So thank you all for coming today, and here's John.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I really appreciate it. So just a little background on myself. I am the lead developer of jQuery. I work for Mozilla. So I still do jQuery in the evenings, so to speak. And Mozilla, right now I'm promoting JavaScript 2. I'm really excited about that. But today, I'm here to talk about specifically the two libraries that I have experience in building and maintaining, and how to apply what I learned into building your own JavaScript library. So the first library that became something that I built was called jQuery. I released this early last year, and it explicitly focused on DOM traversal. The DOM traversal was the absolute core of the library. And then there's a bunch of extra things thrown in, so events and Ajax and animations. And the primary focus of the library was in having, being able to write really succinct code and having a small file size, while still being extensible via a plugin architecture. If you've never seen jQuery script, this is some brief examples. jQuery is focused on, you can break it down into two parts. The first part is where you find something. The second part is where you perform an action against it. And so in jQuery, you're always finding something. I use CSS selectors, and it finds a set of elements, and then you perform an action against them. So in the top one there, you find all divs that are inside the element that has an ID of main, and you're adding a class to them. Or you're performing an animation, or binding an event, or loading a document in through Ajax. And personally, I'd like to think that I did something at least decent with jQuery. Currently, we have about 25 people working on jQuery in all various aspects of it. Like about 250,000 visitors per month, and this is on Google Trends here. You can probably guess which one is jQuery, and these are the other popular JavaScript libraries like Prototype and Dojo. So I think we're doing pretty well for ourselves at the moment. The other library that I have experience with is called FUEL. This is going to be in Firefox 3, and it's designed for extension developers. Currently, you can use JavaScript to develop an extension, interacting with something called XPCOM. And I don't know if you've who here has had experience writing an extension. It isn't the most fun thing in the world, and it could be a lot better. So FUEL is designed for that. It's designed to help web developers get into writing extensions. So there's all sorts of helpers for bookmarks, events, preferences. It's written in pure JavaScript, and it's designed to be extensible. So here's some quick examples. So here we're going through all the preferences and finding all the preferences that have been modified by the user. Looking for when the application, looking for when Firefox is quitting, when the user is quitting Firefox. Opening a new tab and activating it, and then removing all Google bookmarks from your bookmark cache. So I generally distill JavaScript library authoring into these topics, and I'm going to frantically try to cover them all today. So all the way from your initial design of when you're designing the API that you want to implement, all the way down to maintaining the code that you've written. So there's a lot here. The first part of writing a solid API is that I find to be incredibly important is that your code should be orthogonal. And what I mean by that is that whenever you perform an action on an object, it should always be performed everywhere. And I like to use the analogy of CRUD, in that in CRUD you can add, remove, modify, delete, and so I like to use that when designing a new API. So in FUEL, every single object has the same methods and properties. So for every object, so for all bookmarks, to get all bookmarks, you do bookmarks.all. To get all preferences, it's preferences.all. In order to add a new preference, it's prefs.add or bookmarks.add. It's the same thing for every single API, and using the same method names and the same conventions. So that way, if you know how to do preferences, for example, and you want to do bookmarks, there's no learning curve, because since you already know it, it's the same. And what I think this is particularly important is that, for example, in jQuery, when I first implemented it, I forgot to add a remove attribute function. And it was missing literally for months, and simply because it wasn't as popular as adding an attribute value. But if I had taken the time when I first started to map out, okay, if I'm adding an attribute somewhere, I should be removing it as well, then I probably would have caught that. Granted, it's in now, so that's not really an issue. So specifically with FUEL, I made a grid such that you would have literally the columns were add, remove, modify, delete, or sorry, add, remove, modify, and the rows were each piece of functionality. So a preference or whatever, and then and I could literally just fill in the blanks and say, okay, have we figured this one out yet? Have we done this one? And make sure that we have complete coverage of the API. Another point when writing an API is that you should fear adding new items into your API. You need to keep it as small as possible, because every single method that you add, you're going to have to support. So that means that somewhat indefinitely, if you add in a single method, you need to be able to precognitively anticipate what users are going to be doing with that. So I think wherever possible, if you can get away with not adding in a method, you should. And so in jQuery, at one point I added in some methods for CSS helpers. So like .top, .left, and .background. And they weren't used a whole lot, but they provided an extra, what I consider to be bloat on top of the API, since there was already a CSS method for manipulating CSS properties. So I added them in, and then people were using them, and we had to support them. And then when it came, when I decided that it just weren't necessary, and decided to remove them, it was a hassle. So I consider that you should just seriously think about anything that goes in. And now I'm very, very stingy whenever anything goes into jQuery. You should embrace removing code wherever possible. If there's, and again, going back to supporting, because if you're writing a library, you have to support everything that's in it. So you should, wherever possible, remove code that could be handled elsewhere. By reducing the size of your API, you make it easier to learn. You decrease your file size, which is especially important in JavaScript. And it generally makes your code more maintainable. If there's less code there, it's going to be easier to maintain. So a long time ago in jQuery, I had implemented a full CSS3 selector syntax. And there's I don't know if any of you have ever used CSS3 selectors. It's a really stupid specification. And yeah, there's a lot of really bad stuff in there. For example, you can select all children, but you can't select your parent. You can select an adjacent sibling, next adjacent sibling, but you can't eject a previous adjacent sibling. It's just like really, so they did not think orthogonal. They were like, oh, let's just select next, and who cares about previous? And it's really frustrating to deal with. So I actually ran a poll where I had people check off each selector item that they actually have used. And then at the end, there was a whole bunch that nobody checked. And there was one that was like nth of type. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that one, but it selects the nth child of a specific type. And some people had checked that, and we found out that they could actually just use nth child. So we were able to remove a large chunk of the CSS3 specification which is good and bad, in that we're no longer completely compliant. But at the same time, no one was using them to begin with, so we reduced our total API and made things easier to maintain. And so in 1.1, additionally, this is separate. In jQuery 1.1, we reduced the size of the API by 47%, just removing methods and stuff that didn't need to be there.
The metrics here is file size.
So the metric here was each API item we had to document. So if we had to document something, so we removed 47% of what we had to document as well, which is great. Because that means they have to write less. Yes?
So, I mean, we always want to remove, like, deprecated methods and stuff like that, but how do you do that without breaking people's websites? It's like for the Maps API, which is hot links off websites.
All right, so how do you not break? Okay, provide an upgrade path. The important point is that you can't just willy-nilly remove stuff. Otherwise, it's not feasible. So there's two ways to do it. With jQuery, what we do is if we change the API, so like from 1.0 to 1.1, we changed the API, and provided a plugin on top of 1.1 that gave 1.0 users an API that felt like 1.0. Another way to do it is to give 1.0 users an API that feels like the 1.1 API. So I mean, you can decide which direction you want to point. Personally, I think pointing backwards is easier, since generally the more modern API, you don't want to be duplicating functionality. And so by providing a plugin, so they would just use the new API, then directly beneath it include a backwards compatibility API. And all the old plugins and all the old code would just work. Nothing had changed at all.
So on that note, to do that, though, you should have done your versioning identification properly. And the Maps API actually does that nicely, because I guess you can do it.
Yeah.
You probably identified your versions cleanly, right?
Yep. And so the question was, did you identify your versions cleanly? And obviously, and Map does Maps with identifying versions. So yeah, it's pretty important that you do cleanly identify, so that users know at which point they're upgrading from or to.
Although we serve the most, we have a version 2, but that changes every 2 weeks. So if we change something that's in version 2,
Yeah.
which is currently 2.86, then it will break anyone who uses it content.
You should have version 3 that typically see.
Right,
Yeah.
we could, I mean, that's what we made a big jump from 1 to 2, and that's, we were able to get rid of removing things, but it's always a concern for us removing anything from 3 to 2.
Yeah. So that's a tricky point, because so the question was over that the version 2, the minor releases of version 2 keep breaking things. So that's something we tried to stop in jQuery a while ago, and that anything, so 1.1 may break something, well, 1.1.1 won't break anything. I mean, obviously that's, I'm not sure what kind of issue that is, other than to say that maybe whatever file that users directly hotlink to should be something that's not API changing, but give them an option to link to the bleeding edge. So differentiate between a stable versus a bleeding edge. With API, you should always, and this goes back again to simplifying your API, reduce your API to its most common root. And then, because when you do that, you can have a core function that you can build on top of. So right now in jQuery 1.2, I'm actually removing these 3 methods here. And so that you could get, for example, the first element, the first 3 elements, or sorry, everything after the first 3 elements, and everything before the first 2. And these were they're kind of kludgy. And when I was looking at this, I realized that there's already an awesome method for this, and whose usage is already known, called slice. I don't know if you're not familiar with it, the jQuery object, it behaves like an array. And so by implementing a slice method, you can now have a huge amount of power, being able to do things that you couldn't even do with this, and we reduced our API by 67%. Consistency. When writing your API, you should be consistent everywhere. obviously this is easiest if it's one person writing the API. If it's not, you should write up your guidelines ahead of time so that everyone knows what is expected. And I break down consistency into 3 areas. The most obvious is naming. If you're going to pick a naming convention, if you're using camel case or not, or if you, like for events, if you want to do .onClick versus .click. So in jQuery we do .click for no particular reason other than that's the convention that we adopted. So by doing that, that is what users should expect going forward. Argument position. So when someone calls one of your methods, they should know in which order to expect to be able to pass things in. So specifically, passing in an options object. So just in JavaScript, just a native object that has key value pairs, but properties and values. In jQuery, we always pass it in first, always, everywhere in the API. And if we ever have a callback function, that's always the last item in a method. So by having that, at least a little bit of convention, users can expect that if they want to have a callback to something, it's always going to be the last item, and they can expect that. And within a callback, you should always make sure that the context is the same everywhere. So, because if the context is constantly changing, sometimes if it's an object, sometimes if it's an element, no one will know how to interact with it. So in jQuery, the context is always refers to the DOM element that it's referenced to. So implementation. So this is what I consider to be the evolution of a JavaScript coder. So so it goes something like, when someone's just starting out, at least a programmer coming into JavaScript, is something like, oh man, everything is a reference. This is great. It's objects. I can understand this. I understand how this works. And then they realize that they can do object-oriented code. And it's sort of quirky. They kind of understand it. They're doing object-oriented. And then suddenly it clicks how to do object prototypes. And then you can see this. You can usually tell how someone's advanced through JavaScript, where they hit some point and they're like, prototypes, I understand. And then they try it and they do everything with object prototypes. And then I think the final progression of a JavaScript coder is when they realize that the other stuff's good, but it's all about closures. And that their code just suddenly becomes this giant closure minefield of different scopes and contexts. And so there's a couple, quite a few coders who I really aspire, who have fantastic use of closures in their code, and it's just really a thing of beauty. So teaching them Lisp first, that would probably break their soul. But I do consider functional programming to be an absolutely imperative concept, and that yeah, I was saving that one. All right, especially for functional programming, that understanding closures, not only does it make you a better programmer, it especially makes you a better JavaScript programmer. And so this snippet here, having an anonymous function wrapped and executed, is one of the most powerful constructs that you can use in JavaScript. It gives you just an anonymous scope that you can interact in, and you can define local variables within this scope that isn't accessible outside. And you will see this used again and again in code, in different variations. But it's really important. And it sort of transfers down to other concepts. So like being able to write essentially macros to some degree. So having, generating custom functions on the fly. So here we are generating 3 new jQuery methods dynamically that encapsulate another piece of functionality. And this is all using closures because this name here is within this scope. And here's another snippet. I like this one a lot. It's similar to the last one with this difference. So you can call functions in JavaScript within a different context. And what happens is that whenever you call an anonymous function in JavaScript, its default context is the window object, the global object, which doesn't really help you. So if you call it with the call method, and you set its context to this, you now have a context that's equal to the current scope, and you can have local variables. So I consider this to be deceptively powerful, and at least until JavaScript 2 comes along, or at least now with JavaScript 1.7, you can have let statements, and you can have locally defined variables. I think this is a neat little salve that'll hold you over.
So do they have an equivalent of flat as well, or there's no let?
Say again?
Do they have an equivalent of flat? Because you said there's a let, right, for binding lexical entities?
Yeah, and that's
So is there an flat where you can bind a lexical function, or is it the same?
You mean meaning to like a block?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And so you can. That's exactly what you can do. So in JavaScript 1.7, is there? So there's a normal let, statement, and then you can also do let, and then it'll be within this block. Within this block here, this variable will be equal to 100, as opposed to this one, which will be equal to it within the whole block. Encapsulation. This is a really important point for developing reusable and embeddable JavaScript libraries. So if you want your library to be able to live with other libraries and other random pieces of code, you really need to do this, because you don't want your code escaping and potentially harming other people's code. So I'll be getting more into this in a second, but you just want to make sure that nothing of yours, no variables that you define, leak out and affect how other people write. Since in JavaScript, you really can. You can just blow away anyone else's code. And so a nice part of this is that, so if you wrap this construct again, it comes up again, if you wrap your entire library in it, and then you define variables within that scope, compressors can make optimizations. So for example, Dojo's compressor, it looks at variables within a scope that don't escape that scope, and they can do rewriting of them so that the variable names can change from my long variable name into A. And so within that scope, you can use an optimized variable name that compresses really, really nicely into a minified code. Namespacing. This namespacing has the potential to become very verbose, and it's really easy to get lost. Some libraries do this better than others, but the goal of namespacing is that you want to use as few global variables as possible. The less global variables that you use, and the less that you modify global objects, the better, because your code will just be a better citizen of the page that you're currently in. Right now, there's a couple libraries that do one namespace fairly well. Dojo, Yahoo, UI, jQuery. MokiKit is a little bit dicey in that they have one global namespace, but they automatically introduce everything into the global namespace, and then you have to retract it again. It's a little bit weird. But Dojo, Yahoo, UI, and jQuery, at least, do it pretty cleanly. And these are some questions that I like to ask, in that it says, can my code coexist with other random code on the site? This is usually the easiest one to obtain, in that you want to make sure that none of your code blows away anyone else's code or affects anyone else's code. And you also want to make sure that no one else's random code, no matter how badly it's written, will affect your code. So if they extend the object prototype, you need to still work. I mean, you can tell people not to do it, but it's going to happen, and you just need to be safe. The other question, these are some questions now that I'm starting to look at because I think they're particularly interesting. So can my code coexist with other copies of my own library? So if you include jQuery, and then you include jQuery 1.1, you include jQuery 1.2, can you use them together on the same page? Will they will they overwrite each other's methods? That's a harder problem to tackle. It's definitely feasible. And so that's something I'm looking at, and I want to get that in for jQuery 1.2. The other question is, can my code be embedded inside another namespace? So for example, could I take the jQuery namespace and copy it into, let's say, Dojo's namespace? So I could now do dojo.jQuery. And no library can handle that because they depend on special contexts being set and special naming being available. It's also a hard problem. And again, I alluded to this before, but you should never extend native objects, ever. This is it's almost a philosophical point right now, in that the prototype library. It's a fantastic library, absolutely fantastic. The developers really stand up, and they enjoy extending native objects. That's just how they roll. But I don't like it, in that it's they used to have object prototype. They removed that pretty early, and that extending all objects in JavaScript, it's incredibly dangerous, in that you can no longer iterate through an object's keys without getting these random other chunks of code in. But they're hitting problems now. But I think it's absolutely imperative that in a JavaScript library, that it should first work cross-browser. First. Second, it should have functionality. Meaning that if your library did nothing but find elements by class name, but it worked in every browser, that would be a perfect library, in that it achieves the goal perfectly for all people. But if you can never, if there's some piece of functionality that you've implemented where you're just like, it doesn't work in Safari, sorry. I don't think it's valid to claim that that is a valid piece of functionality of your library if you just, if it's not supported. In that case, so a prototype, they extend native HTML elements. So they extend the HTML element prototype to add additional methods on. But that doesn't work in Internet Explorer. So they have these crazy shenanigans that you have to perform in order to, you have to like double wrap your objects in order to traverse around. And it's very inelegant. And I don't think that's a valid solution because it's just, yeah. So, and additionally, another issue that's coming up now is in adding methods to global objects. So specifically, there's a new getElementsByClass name that's part of HTML5, and we implemented it in Firefox 3. So Mozilla, in Firefox 3, and the problem is that prototype also implements that method. And so at first, they were blowing away the native method, which is like 100 times faster. It just completely blows them away. So what they then started to do was they checked to see if the method existed or not. And if it didn't, and if it already existed, they didn't touch it, which is good. But the problem was that people then wrote code that relied on the return value of what prototype did. So prototype returned a modified object that you could call a .each method on. And because that .each method no longer worked, it was breaking code again. It's this crazy world, and this is why I don't like extending native objects at all, because you just have the potential for just these weird mishaps to occur that you don't expect. And at the same time, I think another one was that I think prototype used to implement array.forEach. And so when it came in, and there's a native forEach in Firefox 2. And the native forEach is very fast. It's lightning fast. But the thing is that if you wanted to take advantage of that, and someone else had already included prototype on the page, you would end up using prototype's one because it existed, which was so slow. You don't want to use that slow one because you can do better. So it doesn't just fall back to missing pieces of functionality. It also falls back to speed issues. So perform type checking. I say this one, but I do it very sparingly in jQuery. A little bit more so in FUEL. Well, in FUEL, you have everything's implemented through an IDL interface. And I don't know if anyone's had to deal with IDL, or especially the IDL with JavaScript. It is horrible. because you essentially you can only have specific types come in, and you essentially lose all the beautiful, variable length arguments that you come to love in JavaScript. So anyway, by having type checking, you can make your API very fault resistant. So if a user sends in a null or an undefined by accident, you can handle that gracefully and hopefully give them an error message to at least point them in the right direction. Another case is where a user passes in something that they expect to work. For example, passing in a number into the CSS function. Setting the left or the height to a number. Browsers behave a little bit differently with that. So you can turn that into a string, and add a pixel value. Now the point at which I sometimes disagree with other people is around error messages. They are obviously immensely useful for people to debug with, but they're also very byte costly. You could be transferring many K of just error messages down the pipe, and I think that sort of functionality is better left to a debugging extension. So providing your library, and you could throw in a debugging extension, and suddenly you get all these wonderful error messages.
Package all of your error messages into another file and just put it to the XML HTTP. Why would you want to send all the error messages initially?
Exactly. Oh, so the question was, why not just pull the error messages in with a XML HTTP request? That's valid too. I mean, I would definitely consider that to be an option that you would turn on when you're in, a debugging mode or something.
But still, even when you're running an error message, why load that stuff?
Yeah. So I don't really consider there to be any reason to pass along error messages. Another tip that I like. So tweaking your object constructor. I use this one in jQuery. So jQuery itself is an object, and you can instantiate it. But if you throw this here on the top, so window is the global object, and you check to see if the context is equal to the global object. That is the case when you call jQuery like this. So what that does now is that instead of just trying to run jQuery like a normal function, it goes back and instantiates itself and returns that result. So now this statement in jQuery becomes equivalent to instantiating it, and that it makes for shorter code. Users don't have to worry about that, but as a developer, you still get all the benefits of having this this fast instantiation. Another quick tip for error messages: you should never gobble error messages. So if a user causes an error to occur in their code, especially in a callback, so an AJAX callback or a loop in a function in a loop, never gobble the user's error messages. It seems really tempting in that you don't want there to be bad things happening on a page or whatever, but you should just ignore that and be able to let things pass through. And I think you should even do this with your code, with the library code, in that if an error occurs in the library, don't consume it. Just let it go free, unless you're including error messages of some sort. You should just let it pass through, and at least give people the hope of debugging your code. So complex applications. I consider there to be a couple solutions to complex applications. The most important of which is extensibility. And I think that if you want to write good code, you should keep a light core of functionality and allow users to add in additional pieces of functionality easily. And we do that in just about every aspect of jQuery. Because jQuery is, we just want to keep it small and light and let other people add in what they want. If they want a crazy bouncing animation with some accordion widget, that's fine. They can include that. But we won't include that natively. So just as an example, here's 3 different ways to extend jQuery. The top one is the most common one. This is a typical jQuery plugin. You're adding a new method into the jQuery object, your own function, and now users can use it like any other jQuery method. You can add in custom selectors so that users can now use your own custom selector. And you can add in your own easing animation. So if you want to have it bounce a bounce animation, you can do that. And another really important side effect of this is that it fosters a community. So if users can release their own code and get recognition for it, that's fantastic. You saw a lot of that happen in the Perl community around CPAN, being able to release code and maintain it. And so we're doing that now with jQuery. We have a couple hundred plugins of users just contributing out. So a lot of people consider object-oriented code to be the solution for writing complex applications. I get this time and time again. People will look at jQuery coming from typically the Java world, and they'll look and they're like, oh, what's this? It's like a one-liner, and why not have an object to use that here? And object-oriented code is an answer. I don't think it's the answer, especially within the world of JavaScript, because you have such powerful constructs, functional language constructs, that I don't consider it to be a perfect solution by any stretch. At least not until JavaScript 2, when there's packages and classes and all sorts of nice things. What I consider to be a better solution is the use of first plugins, but secondary, having custom events. Message passing, so between one object to another, is absolutely fundamental to having a library that is usable in a complex situation. And I can't really stress that enough, other than to say that all these libraries now use it. Dojo was a pretty big pioneer in this, and that all of their library and all the things that snap into their library use custom events to communicate. It's pretty elegant. jQuery, we use this, and we've had custom events for a long time, but we're getting better at understanding them and how to apply them. Yahoo UI has them, and Prototype just added them, the new 1.6 release. And so this way, you can now, for example, your component can listen for a drag event, something that doesn't normally exist. And you can now trigger a refresh event on a table or something. So dealing with browser bugs. So Quirks mode. Quirks mode, the website, written by PPK. Fantastic resource. I mean, it helped me so much back in when I was first learning JavaScript. But the fundamental problem with it is that it explains where a problem exists. A specific browser bug exists. So it'll say that the offset top method doesn't quite work quite properly in this browser. And that's good to know, but it doesn't tell you how to solve a general purpose problem. For example, how do you get the computed style of an element in a cross-browser manner? It doesn't explain that. It explains a particular method of an API. And what I think is much more interesting and much harder is understanding these meta problems, these things that encompass multiple APIs. So specifically, looking at how to solve a whole problem set. There's a couple problem sets that are already solved, what I consider to be solved, and that is in the area of DOM events and DOM traversal. Those are pretty well thought out, and you can find a lot of good documentation on that. But there's a lot of them that still require just a tremendous amount of hard work. So the problem of getting an attribute value out of an element, that one's being very close to being solved, I think. The Prototype guys are making good progress. We're making some good progress right now. And the one that I haven't seen anyone tackle yet, but we're starting to now, is getting a computed style. So figuring out how an element currently looks. And it is just a fantastically hard problem because no browser has even attempted to standardize on anything, since there is nothing to standardize on. And so what I've done in these cases is to in your test suite permute just hundreds of possible values. So it tests against, and so I'm tackling this problem right now, getting a computed style, and looking at a dozen different types of elements. Are they display none? Are they visible? Are they a block? Are they within another hidden element? are they normally supposed to be inline? Using that set of values, and then comparing the color attribute, the background color, the height, the width, and you commute all these out, and you have essentially a couple hundred test cases to work with.
Do you expect that API to work in the presence of window size changes and all those things as well?
So do you expect the API to work in presence of window size changes?
Yeah, so you said get the computed style of the element. Get the computed style of the element in what environment? At load time or at render time?
Render time. So at the time at which you call it.
So basically it loads and I ask computed style for that element, and then I make the window bigger or smaller, and then I ask the computed style for that element. I can expect a different answer?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
That's a holiday.
Yep. And so, there's a lot of them that are, the most mind-boggling one is in Safari 2 and 3. And so in Safari 2, if you call the get computed style element, or function, you can't. It's null. And you're like, why is it null? It's supposed to be there. And that's because when you call it on an element that is either display none or within an element that is display none, it's null for whatever reason. So Safari 3 came out, and I was all excited. I'm like, oh, great. They're fixing this problem, because I know they're going to fix this problem, because it's so annoying. And so I go and I call get computed style. It exists. I'm so happy. And so I go to get the value, and it's undefined. And they implemented the interface, but they just made it return undefined now. And the problem is that attributes can return undefined normally. And so now there's no way to differentiate between when it should be returning undefined and when it shouldn't be returning undefined. So the only way, so my horrible abomination was to get the computed style of color, since there will always be a color, and check to see if it exists. And if it does, then that means that we're outside of an element that is display none. I could go on and talk about horrible hacks. I could do many presentations on that. But so yeah, at least this is getting closer to being solved. But again, that's the case where I think you just need to have an immense test case, one that you can't write by hand, one that you have to literally permute out. And then the problem comes up of when you do find a fix, how do you know when to when to run that fix? And this is the progression that I see. Users, when they start, they always check user agent. It's the easiest thing. Oh, is MSIE? No one else could ever report MSIE. And then the common secondary solution that's proposed by people like PPK is to check to see if a specific method exists, which is great. It works for get element ID, things like that. And then you start to think, well, maybe, because there aren't quite some problems that fit into that nice method mold. You're like, well, maybe I'll think of an elegant solution. And then you just realize that you should probably just be checking the user agent anyway. Because especially when you're trying to tackle issues like rendering errors, you just can't check that with an object. There is no way to say, are you quirky when you render this thing? You have to do checks like that. And the issue is that you can't say, oh, well, I'll just check to see if a specific method exists that only exists in Internet Explorer 7. What if another browser comes along and implements that object? Or what if a library comes along and implements that object? Because that is bound to happen, and it'll drive you insane. User agent isn't perfect. I'm not saying it is, but it'll get you close. So documentation. It goes without saying that documentation is essential. But what I think is really important is something that we've explored, is specifically structured documentation. So providing a solid format for how your documentation should be written, either some sort of Java doc, or in the case of jQuery, we use something akin to something called a script doc. But we've since migrated, and we had an XML format. But what's nice about this is when you have a structured format, you can change it into other structured formats, XML, JSON, and you can give it to your users. Because you're not going to write the best API browser. I don't think anyone has a perfect API browser because everyone wants to look at APIs in a different way. So what I did with jQuery is I built an XML format that I pumped the API out in. And people took that and they made their own browsers. So now there's literally a proliferation of other API browsers, cheat sheets that are automatically made with XSLT. People made desktop widgets, doing translations. And all of this is because it's just a structured format to work with. And these people can literally just pull down the latest XML file and update their widget or their cheat sheet instantly. Because they don't have to cull through the documentation and copy and paste. And so it's literally an API for your API, giving people the ability to expand how the API is shown is immensely powerful.
Why did you choose XML and not IDL?
Why did I choose XML and not IDL? IDL isn't expressive enough to express what I want in JavaScript. That's the short answer.
Okay. I just wanted to know. I have nothing against you using it.
Yep. Yeah, the XML format we currently have isn't standardized in anything, simply because no one has looked at just because JavaScript is not Java, and you can't document JavaScript using JavaDoc, no matter how hard you try, unless you write really what I consider to be inelegant JavaScript. So yeah, that's a whole other issue. But one we've been trying to tackle. And the other issue.
What was the issue with ScriptDoc or JSDoc?
So the issue with ScriptDoc or JSDoc is that you can't. Okay, so let's say you want to document what the context is of a callback function. What if you want to document the arguments of a callback function that gets passed to a method? What if you want to document properties that get passed into an object? And these are all immensely common cases for JavaScript libraries, and people just ignore it. So yeah, and even people who are at what I could consider to be like the forefront, so like the Aptana IDE, they're only a part of the way there. It's a large issue. So the other issue is, if you're going to have your documentation in the structured format, and you want people to help, you want people, you're going to make spelling mistakes, you're going to make code mistakes, but people can come in and help you out. So I consider the current solution I have for this is to put it in a wiki. And then you have, the saying is now you have two problems. But at least with a wiki, my current tactic is to use structured templating. And as an aside, if you've ever done media wiki templating, that'll do something to you. So anyway, use structured templating and use that to generate structured documentation. I'm running out of time, so I got to hurry. So leverage, only specifically write the documentation that'll help your users the most, and that'll help the library the most. Because your time is limited, so you should focus on the best stuff first. This is a rough order that I have. So start with the user API. That's definitely most important. And then eventually start to writing documentation on how to write documentation so that other people can come in and know how to do it, and it'll self-perpetuate. And finally, for documentation, you need, if there's no documentation, you really just have to buckle down and do it yourself. There's really no other way. I mean, it's self-explanatory. You just have to do it. Testing. Testing is absolutely essential. And I say don't trust any library that doesn't have a test suite. Any JavaScript library especially. Because of all the fantastically weird browser bugs that exist, I can't do it. Knowing how many bugs I've caught with the jQuery test suite, it puts fear into my heart when I see ones that don't have it. So currently, prototype MogaKit jQuery, Yahoo just got one. Write your own suite. They're pretty easy. Make sure it passes in all browsers. Handle asynchronous tests. Test-driven development is incredibly important. We use it in jQuery all the time. We write our tests first, so they start failing. And then it encourages us to make it not fail, so we write the implementation. And it would be great if there was a way to have a pre-commit hook in Google Code, because then we could check to see if we're passing still before we commit. Just saying. Because I recently wrote a pure JavaScript DOM that runs in Rhino, so that you can and it can run the full jQuery library. There's some more information about that on my blog. I won't go into it in detail here. So the future testing is I consider to be so multi-browser testing, so that you can take a patch, push it to the code base, and it'll distribute out into everyone's browser, everyone who's logged in, and it'll come back with all the test results, and it'll come back to you. So you can essentially distribute your load and your test cases. And I consider this to be the future. And we're starting to explore that now. We'll see what it leads to. So maintenance, make it easy to tackle new bugs. You should interact with your community a lot. And most importantly, this is absolutely important, is that you need to maintain the focus of your library. And even if it's nothing more than one semi-benevolent dictator standing over the project saying, no, that shouldn't go in, or no, that has to be named that way, you have to do it. Otherwise, you're going to get just a garbled mess of, I don't know, factory generators or something. I mean, you need to have oversight, and you need to maintain focus. And so that's what I've done with jQuery. Every time someone tries to commit, I put them through this horrible gauntlet. But I think it maintains the focus of the library pretty well. So I want to open up the questions in like the couple minutes that I have left.
So we have a mic here for questions.
Well, see, your library seems very nice, but is it more or less targeted to Firefox, and wouldn't actually be reasonable to use it, say, on a cell phone?
jQuery?
Yeah.
No, jQuery is cross-browser. FUEL is Firefox only.
I see.
Yeah,
so,
jQuery is Safari 2.3, IE 6.7, Firefox 1.5.2, Opera.
yeah, and my cell phone supports IE4.
Sorry. I'm not going there. Yes.
How do you filter the noise in the community? Is that something you guys trouble with, like just loud vocal minority or stuff like that?
It's hard. You have to use your discretion. And I mean, that's really the advantage of you having a plugin architecture, is that you can say, go make it a plugin. If your plugin becomes popular, then we'll bring it back in. You tell them to prove themselves first. And, if they, because there's a lot of people who are like, oh man, I wish I had these crazy advanced animations in jQuery. No, we're not even wish. It's saying that they must be in jQuery. And you just have to say no, because even, especially for file size concerns. But I mean, so you can say, here, go use this plugin.
Going the dojo route of having multiple build sets so that you could just get just the subset you need.
So a question regarding the dojo route and having multiple build sets, given just the build set you need. You can do that right now in the jQuery build system. There's a make file, and you can tailor it. But we definitely want something more advanced, and we're working on it right now, so that you can pick and choose what parts of jQuery, not that jQuery's huge, it's 20K, but at least pick and choose what plugins you want to include into your custom build. But yeah, that's definitely a concern.
Actually, a question right here.
Okay.
Do you think that there'll ever be a time when library development like this sort of isn't necessary anymore, or do you actually think that the ecosystem of libraries is a good way for advancing state of the art?
So will it ever change? No. Not in any future that I foresee. There's no incentive for certain browsers to implement standardization. It simply isn't market beneficial for them. So why should they become standards compliant? Because then people can go elsewhere. And so there's always going to be differences, no matter what. And even if there isn't differences, people will implement their own special methods. Let's say, like get elements by class name, which maybe only a couple browsers will implement. But you want a special case to see if that exists, and if it does, use that fast method. If it doesn't, use this other method. It's not going away, and does it help the ecosystem? Definitely. I mean, I've been doing CSS3. I've been using CSS3 now for about 2 years, which is about 2 years more than anyone who's ever written the CSS3 specification. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm bitter. Okay. Yes.
How would you compare jQuery to something like Google Web Toolkit?
So how would I compare something like jQuery to something like Google Web Toolkit? Completely different ballgame. So jQuery is pure JavaScript, client-side only. And it has some Ajax-y bits to communicate, but there isn't any object persistence. Modify an object on the server, go to the client. It's it's significantly different in a lot of ways. No questions. Oh wait, we got one right here.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, do you have any information on what's the largest size project that jQuery is being used in terms of size of development team and size of code base, roughly?
Development team and code base.
I guess to rephrase the question, is jQuery designed more for small one-off projects, or do you think it would be useful for a project that has like 100 developers working on some massive system?
I don't know. I mean, it's definitely, I don't know of any 100 developer teams that are using jQuery. But it is used, let's see, I don't know, MSNBC, DIG, IBM, Oracle, Cisco. There's a massive list of on the website. But most of those teams, I'd say largest, maybe a dozen. I don't know of any massive teams like that. Otherwise, I think we would have been seeing contributions coming back from them. Say again?
Independent of jQuery, a thought of 100% JavaScript project is thoroughly frightening.
So the thought of a 100% JavaScript project is frightening. And I don't know. It's very different, definitely. But I like it. And it provides a different level of freedom. And especially, it brings in people from all backgrounds. So on jQuery, we have people coming from Cold Fusion, PHP, Ruby, Perl. I mean, literally, they all write different languages in their day-to-day job, but they all come in and but the JavaScript is this common playground for developers, and it's like no man's land, where they parlay, and it's I don't know, I like it. I like the language a lot, and I think I don't know, I like it.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Just say a few more words about distributed testing.
Okay, so
Transparent to users. What kind of tests do you actually can you run?
Okay, so distributed testing. So what we're looking at with that right now is, so the users would be essentially sitting on a page that auto refreshes. Or pulls an Ajax chunk of tests, and just runs that batch of tests with that specific version of, let's say, jQuery, and then reports back how many tests passed or failed, or just the results. So we do this a little bit right now in Mozilla. We have we imported the MokiKit test suite. We call it Moki test. And one of the things that I did is I brought in all the JavaScript library test suites, and I had them running in this little mini web server on Moki test. So the test suite runs, and then it AJAX back the results, and then that is aggregated into the full Mozilla build system. So every time when you do a commit to make a change to Firefox, you're running against MokiKit, Prototype, Scriptaculous, jQuery, all their test suites. So I mean, it's still pretty experimental, but I think we at least had the foundation. What I ultimately want to get to is where any layperson can be running this in their browser, so that they can load up random old version of Conqueror, and they could test because that means something to them. So yeah.
Thanks, John.
Yep.